Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. We finally arrived at the introduction of Sega on our video game buyer's guide with their basically introductory hardware. I say basically because they had other machines in Japan only, but this was their first worldwide success, the Sega Master System. Also known as the SG-1000 Mark III or something like that in Japan. I don't know. It's got weird names. They got weird names over there. I don't know. But the Master System is well known and well beloved by gamers and collectors and Sega fans alike. Unfortunately for us, and those of us who were alive in 1986, the Sega Master System took a back seat to the NES, which we've already talked about. But it's still a worthy system worth recognizing and exploring. What is the Master System? It's Sega's 8-bit NES. That's what it is. It's literally the same thing. It's, slightly better graphics, slightly more colors, etc. Like, on paper, it's technologically, on paper, superior to the NES. But in practical reality, it's not, because Nintendo cheated and used, chips in their cartridges to enhance the processing power of the NES, but that's another story for another day. But, yeah, it's still a damn good system. The Master System is somewhat unique, and I say somewhat because while it does use the now standard cartridge at the time, firmly standard cartridge, ROM cartridge to store the data of your video games, it also uses the experimental, basically, I will call it a flash cart, but it's like a credit card with ROM chips on it, basically, which was the standard for the TurboGrafx, but the Master System 1 did it first, and 2 did it better because it also had a cartridge port. So you could put games on little chips, or you could put them on cartridges. Now, unfortunately for us today, this does mean most of the retro clones that are technically compatible with the Sega Master System software are not compatible with physical Master System games entirely because they don't usually support the chip cards. They mostly only support the cartridges. Same thing can be said with the adapter that lets you play Master System games on the Sega Genesis, and I believe there was one that did so on the Game Gear, but don't quote me on this because I haven't been able to look this thing up to confirm it. I've only heard people talk about it on discussion forums, so I don't know if it was planned and never released, or if it was an accessory, but I do know the power-based converter did exist and let you play Master System games on your Genesis or Mega Drive if you were outside the US. Most of your retro clones do not support Master System games, but a handful do. None of them are... There's no dedicated Master System retro clones to my knowledge. There's just retro clones that are multi-consoles that also support Master System games. So that's a way to go if you don't want to go physical hardware. Now, the Master System also used the then standard NES-style D-pad 2 buttons, which, again, it came out around the same time as the NES. So I don't like to say Nintendo created the D-pad, style controller, but they did popularize it. But Master System was right there side by side with it, to help make it standard, but it is what it is. Now, the Master System in its day, aside from the aforementioned power-based converter, comes in two hardware form factors. You have the original Master System, and the more compact, at the time less expensive, but probably more expensive today because of, supply and demand, Master System 2. If you're gonna get a Master System physical retro hardware, get the original. Don't get the Master System 2. If you're going to get a retro clone, do your homework to make sure it supports the games you want to play, as well as possibly the cards, although I don't think... I'm not 100%, but I don't think any retro clones support the cards. But again, I'm not 100% on this. But the Master System... them is also somewhat unique in that I don't know. Well, I do know it's not technically the first game console with built-in software, because obviously all the Pongs had built-in software, including the Odyssey. But it does feature a built-in game that you can play without putting a cartridge in. So it's playable, it's usable as a product if you never bought a single game, or if you bought one that didn't come with a pack-in game, which, why would you? But if you did, whatever. If you did, it technically has a game built in you can play. To the best of my knowledge, said game has never been re-released in digital storefronts, so you're pretty much limited to physical hardware or emulation. Fortunately, because the Master System is exceptionally primitive by today's standards, but also used basically off-the-shelf, fairly standard parts for the time, it was easily emulated early on, so the emulation scene for the Master System is fairly robust. There are multiple emulators out there that are compatible with Master System software, and they're all pretty much varying degrees of good to awesome. They're all playable. None of them suck. I don't think Sega ever did a Master System Mini. I know they did a Genesis Mini, but they've done a lot of Genesis plug-and-plays, so it was easy to do the Genesis Mini, plus the Genesis was more successful than the Master System, so there is that. Unfortunately for us as collectors, the Master System software library is mostly limited if you're in the US. If you import Japanese games and or a Japanese console, you can add a ton more games to your software library, as well as if you import from Brazil, surprisingly, or Europe as well. So you're not limited to just the games that were released in your specific region. And worldwide, the Master System has a fairly robust software library, comparable in most respects to the NES. Now, the Master System, while it was technically competing with the NES, again, it also, like most Sega home consoles, took Sega's arcade-first approach, because Sega was an arcade company at the time. Well, and still are to this day. Arcades is where they make their money, and they always have. And likely always will. Because they're like it, as far as arcades go today. They're like basically the only one left. Basically. Anyways, so because it did take the arcade-first approach, a significant portion of your Master System software library, aside from, the standard games that were multi-platform that were on the NES and the Master System, most of them, excuse me, are going to be arcade ports to varying degrees of quality. If you're looking for more arcade-accurate conversions of some of these games, excuse me, you're better off getting the Genesis or sticking to the actual arcade ROMs via compilations, etc. or emulation. But the Master System versions are still, passable. They're playable. Also, because the Master System was still technically on sale during the introduction of the Sega Genesis, and there was some overlap, some of the Genesis hits, notably Sonic the Hedgehog, were downported to the Master System, but they're not straight ports. They're like the Game Gear versions in that they're conversions. They're completely original games, loosely based on the Genesis title. Now, Sega hadn't yet settled on a corporate mascot at the time, at the time they were promoting and actively developing Master System product. So initially they tried to push Alex Kidd as the mascot. But Alex Kidd games are, I'm going to be upfront with you. They're low quality games. They're not good games. Yes, they're enjoyable if you have nostalgia for them, or they're enjoyable if you've already got all of the actual good 8-bit games and you're looking for more 8-bit games. They're playable, but they're not like great games in their own right. They're not bad games. You know, on a 5-star scale, I would say most of them are like 3.5 stars. You know, so they're like upper middle tier. Not as good as your Mario, Mega Man, you know, Castlevania, etc. But still good enough. Now, due to the funky nature of Nintendo's exclusivity contracts, there are not a lot of the big heavy hitters that were on the NES available on the Master System, but there are some. Some of the ones that were available on the Master System were because said company either didn't sign an exclusivity contract with Nintendo in that they released games maybe legitimately for Master System and elsewhere, but released unlicensed ports on the NES because they were like, fuck Nintendo. Or it was a case where Sega or somebody else licensed the game from them and brought it to the Master System that way. Usually Sega did it themselves. If you've never owned or ever played a Sega Master System, so even if you've never actually played proper Master System titles or software on legitimate Master System hardware or software through emulation, you already have a pretty good idea of what Master System games are like, because they're very comparable to 8-bit NES games, and in a lot of cases almost identical to their Game Gear counterparts. So, even if you have never played like proper Master System games, you've played Master System games, whether it was on the Game Gear or the Genesis or the NES, because a lot of the games that were on the Master System were available elsewhere. And the Master System ports are not always fully unique. A lot of times they are. A lot of times they do feature special features or bonus levels or some kind of quirk that make it different enough from its NES counterpart to justify it existing as a separate entity. A lot of your Master System games are high quality games. For the amount of software on the Master System, I will argue percentage-wise, just percentage-wise, it has a higher percentage of quality titles than the NES does. Now, this is because Sega had to try harder to make the game stand out because they didn't have third-party partners, and because the NES was a massive, massive success. It was basically a dumping ground for shovelware. So you don't have as much shovelware on the Master System as you do the NES. So while you're still going to have a lot of fun, quirky 8-bit games on the Master System, they're not going to be as quirky as your quirky NES games. Still quirky enough that they're worth your time, but meter your expectations. You're not getting any Action 52 on the Master System. That being said, because a higher percentage of the games on the Master System are top quality games, and because there's not a ton of shovelware, you can pretty much blind buy Master System titles, and it's a safe bet you're getting a good game. Now, there are exceptions, because there's always exceptions. There are cash-ins that are not great games that do exist on the Master System, most notably Disney titles, because for whatever reason, Capcom made their best 8-bit Disney games on the NES, and what you got on the Master System were their, half-assed, whatever, cash grabs. This is not always the case, but it's a rule of thumb. But likewise, how a lot of your, licensed cash grabs on the NES or shovelware, a lot of your licensed cash grabs on the Master System are also going to be shovelware. They're just a different brand of shovelware. So that's where you're going to find most of the shovelware on the SMS. Now let's talk about who is interested in a Sega Master System and who is it for. I would argue that it's obviously for Sega fans. 100%. If you love the Genesis, you're going to love the Master System. It's, it's the Genesis little brother, but it's still a fun system. You're going to get a lot of the Sega feels on the Master System. It feels like a Genesis with just, 8-bit graphics instead of 16-bit graphics. If you've ever played the Game Gear, you've played your Master System. It's the same games most of the time. Hardcore collectors are going to want the Master System because it has a surprisingly robust software library for a system that is, for all intents and purposes, a commercial failure. Likewise, if you're a Nintendo fan, like an 8-bit nut, I'm talking Pat the NES Punk, angry video game nerd levels of obsessed with 8-bit games, you desperately want to add a Master System to your library because you're going to get so much more 8-bit goodness than, on top of what you're already getting with the NES. And the Master System is on the level, on par with the 8-bit goodness on the NES. It's not like the TurboGrafx or the 7800, which I've already talked about. Their software is just rubbish. No, you got some good shit on the Master System. Some damn good shit. And there are a handful of legitimate exclusives to the Master System that are by and large rock solid titles. Now, like the NES, the Master System was successful enough worldwide, maybe not in various specific regions, maybe not as successful as the NES in America or, Britain, but worldwide successful enough that Sega, via their partnership with Tonka, who were the ones who brought it over to the US initially, did produce a lot of 8-bit style quirky accessories for the Master System. So you're going to find stuff like the light gun and arcade sticks and, your standard quirky 8-bit accessories that you're going to love to collect on the NES. You're going to find comparable but equally quirky fare on the Master System. Most notably, aside from the phaser and, the joysticks, etc., is the 3D glasses. The Master System is unique in that, as far as I know, it is the only home console ever made that supported 3D out the gate. You do have to have the 3D glasses, but they're specific 3D glasses, and there are specific software titles that take advantage of the 3D. And these are not your red and blue paper glasses you get from 7-Eleven. However, much like the ill-fated Virtual Boy, the 3D effect is not that great. And it's probably going to give you a headache if you play it for too long. It's neat, it's unique, but it's, it exists. Now, before you come at me with, but the 3DS, I said home console. The 3DS was a handheld, so eat my dick, my girl dick. Thank you very much. Alright, who else would be interested in a Master System? Honestly, I think basically any video game collector should explore the Master System library in one way or another. I'm going to rate it as for everybody. If you're going to buy an NES, you have no reason to not own a Master System. It is literally on par. Features, accessories, quirkiness, and software. Maybe the NES has 2 or 3 times the total software as the SMS, but like I said, percentage-wise, you're more likely to find hits on the Master System than you are misses. So yeah, it's a safe bet. It's a good system to own. I love the Master System. I've never actually played physical Master System hardware. I've owned one in the past, but I didn't have the box to hook it up to my TV at the time. But I've played the vast majority of Master System software via emulation, and they're all good games. Not literally, legitimately 100% all of them, but like I said, like the hits are the hits are good, you know. And even your quirky games that AVGN or Pat the NES Punk or whoever are going to shit on are still fun and quirky in their own respects. I would argue there's no, like, broken, shitty, awful Action 52 level of rubbish on the Master System, which, depending on your perspective, could be a good thing or a bad thing. But there's enough quirkiness on the Master System to satisfy that itch. If you love the NES, you will love the Master System. As maybe not as much, but close enough. And also, I would rank the completists. Obviously, would want a Master System as well. So I'm rating it as for everybody. Literally anyone who collects video games should collect for the Master System, be it physical or digital, one way or the other. Stay cool.